Happy to be here. Just a quick note before we get started in terms of the presentation. Ask any questions you want during the presentation, after the presentation. I'm more than welcome for it to be as interactive as possible, but I want to make sure if this is the last time that you see me that you get something, you get a take-home message from it, or you get something that you can use. Leo's right. We met about two and a half years ago. I got a call from my buddy Scott Lynn in the back, and up in LA, he said, "Hey, let's go to UGP. Mike Adams is going to be there. E.A. Tischler is going to be there. Dave Wright's going to be there." And if you're not familiar with those names, those are all top 50 swing instructors by Golf Magazine or Golf Digest or whatever it is. And so from the very start, Leo has kind of set a precedence for surrounding himself and what he does in terms of golf development with UGP with really high level content and knowledge. And then just in the back, he's super humble and he's super subtle about it, but that's probably one of the best golf biomechanists in the world that you have in the back. And so I just thank Leo for getting people like that together and really paving the way in terms of golf development and what he's doing here at UGP. Just a little bit about myself. Who am I? And so I like to think that I have a unique background in terms of what I do in terms of golf development. I'm not a swing coach by any means. By nature, I'm a sports scientist. And so my formal training has been my formal academic training in the area of motor learning and control, which is basically the study of how we refine movement patterns and learn new movement patterns, have been paved by these two gentlemen here. So gentleman on the left, his name's Dick Schmidt. He passed away a couple of years ago. He's my undergraduate advisor at UCLA. And the gentleman on the right, his name is Dick McGill. He was my PhD advisor at LSU. He's now at Columbia University. But in terms of the field, they're like the two Jedi masters of the field of motor control and learning. I've been super fortunate to learn a lot from the both of them, and they kind of shape me who I am as an academic researcher, or as an academic. And so I am an academic that consumes a portion of what I do. And so I'm an associate professor at Long Beach State University. And I teach motor control and learning at Long Beach State University. I also direct the Center for Sport Training and Research at Long Beach State University, is where we do multidisciplinary research and training of a variety of different sports and athletes there. And so we have engineering, physical therapy, all that stuff, right? It's very multidisciplinary in nature. And then I'm also the associate editor for the International Journal of Golf Science for their motor learning and control section. What else is on there? Oh, and while I was in graduate school, I got recruited by USA Track and Field to be their head motor learning scientist for USA Track and Field. So I did that for probably up until like 6 or 7 years ago. I stopped doing that. So I had a lot of unique interactions with high-level athletes and high-level scientists. So in general, how I like to view myself is someone who does research, but also can go out into the sport community and offer coaches, players, practitioners, evidence-based approaches for what it is that they do, or to make their athletes and their players better. So that's just kind of me in a nutshell. So goals. So some of the couple of goals that I have here that I'd like to accomplish in the short time that we have is to first of all explain what you have here at UGP, at least from a scientific perspective. And I think what you have here at UGP is something special in terms of what they're doing and how they're incorporating a scientific approach to what it is that they're doing. A lot of people these days do incorporate a scientific approach, but it's very multidisciplinary in nature. And so we're going to talk about what they're doing here, and there's an official term for it. It's called the constraints-based approach. And then we'll describe what that is. And then from a scientific background, you'll be able to see some of the nice pieces that they have here for you, and the unique opportunities that you have participating in the programs here. And then the second half, we're going to talk about practice, right? And I think not only in golf, but in a variety of sports, this is one of the things that's probably talked about a lot and probably understood the least, and probably executed probably the poorest in all our different sports science disciplines. And so we'll talk about that, and it'll give you some general ideas about how you can go about having more efficient practice, right? Because think about the time that you have with your instructor. Let's say you're really adamant about your golf instruction, and let's say you have a lesson once a week, right? That's 1 hour a week. But how many hours are you practicing a week? So your composition of time, or your proportion of time, is much greater as it relates to practice. So we have to be really good with how we're doing that, because ultimately that's going to be, at least in my opinion, it's going to be a game changer with what you do. Okay, so our outline, we're going to talk about constraints, and then I'll give you a framework for practice. It's just me digesting a bunch of research concepts to you in a simple manner, kind of outlining that there are specific ways that we need to look at practice. Okay. So any questions so far? Any questions so far? Be as interactive as you can, right? It'll make it go it'll be a lot more fun for all of us. If you don't understand, or if I go too fast over a concept, just let me know, and I'll be more than happy to.
How do you work together? Because I think, what do you do day to day in an environment like that?
Yeah, so the analogy that I like to give, because I like to eat a lot, is I always say biomechanists such as Scott, they give us ingredients, or they give me ingredients. So it's what do they need to work on, right? So it could be you need a little bit more vertical forces in the ground, or you need a little bit more glide in your swing, or spin in your swing, right? Someone like Scott is the best in the world at identifying those types of things. But identifying those things and figuring out what you need to do in your golf swing is different from training and practicing how to do those things, how to refine those patterns. And so what I'll get from a biomechanist is they'll tell me what they need to work on, and then what I will do is I'll give them a formula or plan for how to work on it, right? So it could be similar to like a strength training regimen. Yeah, I need to work on my lower body strength and explosion, but how do you do that? How many sets, what exercises, how many reps, etc. And so it's mainly I get the information from the biomechanist, and when I get the information on how they should be moving, I can create a plan, a practice plan on how you should go about training or practicing, refining or improving those things mechanically that you want to improve on. Any other questions? And so that's literally how it works. So if I'm with an athlete, the best scenarios, there's a coach, there's a biomechanist, there's a motor learning control person such as myself, there's a physio, there's a strength coach, there's probably a psychologist, and you think about those things that I'm naming off, and there are a lot of things that you have available to you now, right? So you have instruction, you even have fitting, we'll talk about fitting, you have a recovery room there. So you have a lot of those components here. And so that's one of the really good opportunities that you have being a participant here. Right. Any other questions? All right, so now we'll get into the kind of the framework for at least UGP here in Orange County, kind of how they're operating off of this constraints-based approach, and really what is it? So the constraints-based approach is a very popular and powerful motor control theory or approach to looking at human movement, how we can control our movements, right, and why we move the way we do, right? And so I'll give you this example here. Just take a look at this. This is Anthony Robles. He's a national champion, Division I college wrestler.
Say that having a missing leg is a disadvantage, but really, my mom used to tell me that God made me this way for a reason, and I believe that reason is wrestling. And being on the crutches so much, it really helped to build up my upper body and reduce my grip strength. And that's really what I use so much in my wrestling, is my grip strength and my upper body. That's my advantage. And I just really kind of tweaked with it, and with the help of my coaches, we came up with a wrestling style that it's effective for me.
All right. Back this up there. So that's pretty darn amazing, right? I mean, this is a national championship, Division I. and he's the best. He's best in the country at what he did, right? And he has one leg, right? So most of you, when you see that, how do you see that? How do you see his physical constraints? Do you look at that and say, wow, that is absolutely amazing? Most of you probably do, and you'd be rightful to do so, right? Okay, so when we look at that, or when I look at that, I say that he has a physical constraint. Now, when you hear the word constraint, do you think of something that's positive or something that's negative? Most of the time, people think that it's a negative thing, right? But in the motor control world, we don't think of constraints as a negative. We actually, there could be positive or they could be negative. So imagine you're Anthony Robles' opponent, and you have to wrestle him. Are you at an advantage or are you at a disadvantage?
Disadvantage.
Why are you at a disadvantage?
Because all his life he's worked on his motor skills, his muscles are all upper body.
Anthony Robles is, right?
Right.
So as he said, right, in the interview, well, he's had to do everything, rely more on his upper body, so he's just going to be stronger with his upper body, right? But if you're his opponent, are there other things that would be maybe a benefit or a disadvantage?
Or I never wrestled someone with one leg before.
Yeah, right? So while he may have one leg, all of a sudden the opponent is wrestling someone with one leg and he has one less thing to grab onto, right? So how we want to look at this situation from both perspectives, there's some positive constraints and there's some negative constraints, right, that have to be overcome by both people. And so what we're going to see is we're going to have different types of constraints. We all have physical constraints in here, right? So you go in, everybody did a movement assessment, right, when you came into UGP, and they did a variety of mobility tests, and you found out, wow, I don't have such good range of motion, or maybe in my explosion doing a standing long jump isn't all that great, right? Those would be physical constraints, right? And so that is going to influence how we move, because Anthony Robles' missing leg influenced how he moved, right? And so here's another example here of a constraint. This, you'll see some stuff. This is my son Kingston when he was, I don't know, maybe that's 1 or something like that. But that's him on the left with an adult driver, right? And then that's him on the right with something that's going to fit him a little bit more. And right, so don't worry about ball flight here. But look at and see how he's dealing with the task in terms of his movements. Right? So he's roughly the same age. So if we talk about his development or his movement milestones being roughly the same, what's the big difference here that's influencing how he moves? It's a club, right? So all of a sudden you put a club in his hand that fits him, it's a right weight for him, and we get a much better movement pattern. Okay, so this is what's the constraint here? Right? The equipment. Like we call that the task characteristics, right? So you have club fitting here, right? And we know that club fitting does make a difference in terms of ball flight and how we're hitting the ball. So that's our second constraint, right? So here's another one. We're going to leverage Kingston again. So that's him up top playing golf, and then this is him playing baseball here. That's his golf. He's getting his baseball swing here. Right? So we also have another constraint here. This is probably a little bit harder to see. But what do you see here in terms of...
Is he ambidextrous?
Yeah, some people might say he's ambidextrous, but he plays golf. He plays golf right-handed, and he hits baseballs left-handed. Right? Has everybody heard, oh, you're right-handed, do everything right-handed. Oh, you're left-handed, do everything left-handed. Right? Everybody's heard that before, right? And so that's kind of in the motor development, motor control world, whether you're right-handed or left-handed is pretty much a myth. Kids can do anything they want, right or left-handed. But what is the constraint here when we talk about saying to a child, you're right-handed or you're left-handed? What's the constraint there? We have physical constraints that we saw with Anthony Robles. We have task constraints that we saw with the club length. What is the constraint here that's going to influence, well, Kingston could do right or left?
Mental.
Psychological or mental, there is a component to that.
I don't know, elementary school, I wanted the brand new plastic covered scissors for left-handers. So I raised my hand and said I was left-handed. I wanted those. I couldn't cut for shit.
So we have to be aware of the difference between being able to do something and do something really well. If I ask you all to write your signatures with your right hand, write your signatures with the left hand, this is a old school motor control exercise, is they might look a little bit different, but if I were to ask you, is the font the same? It would be the same. If we looked at general patterns of your signature, it'd be roughly the same. But that's just a use thing, right? That's just a practicing. But if we gave everybody the chance to practice the same right-handed and left-handed at a young age, they'd be able to do both. And so this is an example of an environmental constraint, right? And the environmental constraint for him is me, right, as a father or as a coach, where I say, well, we're going to play golf right-handed and we're going to hit baseballs left-handed. Right? And so how I looked at it was, is there an advantage if you hit baseballs left-handed?
Yeah, you're closer to first base.
You're closer to first base, right? And then if you go even more in terms of college pitchers, the right-handed pitchers are usually worse than the left-handed pitchers, right? That sort of thing. And then in golf, is there an advantage for being a right-hander in golf? You have more access to equipment, right? And I asked Leo about this the other day. If you go in the swing cat room, what's the swing cat set up for? For right-handers. So there's some advantages for being a right-hander if you're a golfer, right? And so that's just me saying, I know from instead of free double doubles working at In and Out, right? Everybody has a little perk for their job. Well, he gets this type of stuff. So I say, all right, we're going to go left-handed with your baseball swing, you're going to go right-handed with your golf swing. And so those are three things, right? Our physical structure, our task characteristics like the club, those types of things, and then the environment. And this is what's going on here, right? This is what we study. This is what we teach our students. This is what we research. Oh, what happened there? Oh, there we go. Is this the interaction of three different things, right? Together. We can't look at them individually, but we have to look at them together. We have the environment, we have the task, right? So you can think about environment is, why is this place laid out the way it is, right? Why is instruction and training here done in a group setting, right? Why aren't they always telling you exactly what to do with everything that you do? Right? That's your environment. And then you have the task constraints. No one has the same golf clubs here, right? And you can get fitted here. And then you get fitted based on how you move here, right? And then we have the individual constraints, right? You train in this room right here to work on your individual constraints. Maybe a small amount of flexibility. You want to get more flexibility. You want to get more mobility. You want to get stronger, right? You want to increase your endurance levels. All these three things combined affect the way that you play golf, right? And the nice thing, how UGP has designed it is this is something that's living in terms of what you're doing, right? They're living this in terms of how they're offering their program, okay? And so I just wanted to share that with you in terms of the opportunity that you have here and how the foundation for it is founded in a really popular motor control theory right now, right? They just don't roll out of bed and say, all right, I had a dream last night and I think this is going to work, okay? So we actually have some evidence for this. And so there are some constraints with regards to skill development. Now we're going to narrow focus a little bit, okay? These are some areas that we'll talk about. We're going to primarily talk about that last one today because we don't have enough time to talk about all those ones. Any questions that I can answer for you before I go on? Any questions at all? Okay.
So do you know, like with Kingston now, do you think it would be exactly the same results if you just let him pick whether he was right-handed or do you think it would be exactly the same?
I think if I didn't have any involvement, at least in his golf, I think they'd put him as a right-hander, but in baseball, they'd make him hit right-handed. Like they actually had to do that when he was younger. They actually set him up, all the kids up right-handed, because, I mean, even in baseball, there are a few left-handed hitters, so they would have set them up that way, right? All right.
Even when you're one-hand dominant, you don't think you generate more power from that side?
Well, think about what your why are you one-hand dominant? Or what are you one-side dominant? Yeah, you're using it more, right? So if we equate everything and make everything even, right, we're going to be able to do everything the same way. And that's supported with a major motor control theory. It's basically all of our movement patterns. It's not muscle-based, right? It's not body-based, but it's nervous system-based, right? So you always think about it as we have the program up here, and whether we want to do the program on the right side or the left side, we still have that program up here. We don't have a right side and left side program for it. Yeah, it's just the reason why we're dominant is because we use it a lot, and we were told at a young age to do it.
How about things like skateboarding and snowboarding? People tend to be regular or goofy, and there's tests like you push somebody and their first step forward is right foot or left foot.
Yeah.
And like I'm right-footed and I'm right-hand dominant, but I ride goofy, and my son is right-handed dominant. And
Yeah.
when he was 4, he was still making, and he wasn't playing sports. He hadn't spent a whole lot of time developing it.
Yeah.
But his natural tendency was to go one way. My 2 kids are, everything's right-handed. One's goofy, one's regular.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So one of the tests that Scott does with the swing catalyst is they do a leg dominance test. And the leg dominance is based like how you're supposed to pivot back. Like it's going to make some decisions based on that. But you have to think about over time, what are the environmental constraints that influenced that leg dominance, right? So if we took a child that did everything symmetrical through their life, right, would they have the preference over one side? Meaning, so I'd imagine there's a really big correlation with lower leg dominance based on how you were taught to shoot a basketball or a basketball layup. So if you're right-handed, what leg do you take off? You always take off your left, right? Or that's the proper way of doing it. So you were termed right-handed, so how many times are you going to do your layup off your left foot? Way more times than your right. So a lot of the times, those types of assessments, it's not that they're right or wrong, it's just that the answer is derived from development over time, right?
I mean, that's why, like, like one of my friends is an Olympic athlete, and he does the half pipe on skis.
Yeah,
And they say, oh, since he's able to do a 1,200 both ways,
yeah,
then he wins. Because most of them are only able to go one way, because that's his dominant way. Well, he's able to go both ways, because everybody can't, because it's his dominant way is one way.
yeah. So, yeah, and a lot of that is an environmental constraint, right? So someone probably said, or maybe he even did it.
Am I right-handed? Am I right power
Yeah.
leg, or is that?
Well, we're going to have a preferred side based on what we tend to favor, right? So for me, for example, I've had a left knee issue, so I tend to favor my right side because I want to stay off my left knee, right? And that's because of an injury. And so that could be, if my injury was 5 years ago, then I had 5 years of favoring my right side.
Would that
Right.
be his preference?
For me, that's survival.
Okay. All right, I like that.
Right? For me, that's survival. But for our kids, it's how we're putting a bat into their hand, right? When we teach them to ride a skateboard, do we say, okay, you have a choice. You can either face this way or you can face that way? Or do we say, this is how I ride a skateboard. You don't do this outwardly to them, but you send them on the skateboard based how you would set yourself up on the skateboard.
Well, that's just it, right? I've got 2 kids, and I set it up exactly the same way. Here's the board, jump on it.
Yeah.
And one will go one way, the other one, and this is 3, 4 years old.
Uh-huh.
They're making choices, and they're not athletes. I mean, kind of like your son at 1, right? He's not.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe he has some dominance, and
Yeah.
maybe you're having him hold the spoon one way or the other.
Correct. That's why I like to use the word preference, because you have a preference, right? But that doesn't mean you're right-handed or left-handed. That just means you prefer your right side over your left side. Okay, good questions. Okay, yeah.
Too late once you're pretty old.
So in terms of you've always done something with your right hand, you have a couple variables that are working against you. So in terms of neuroplasticity, you're not as easy to overcome change at older ages. And because of physical and developmental issues that you have, it's going to be a little bit difficult. But is it impossible? No, it's not. It's going to take you a little bit longer. Yeah, that type of stuff is actually good to prevent any kind of age-related dementia. So things like Alzheimer's disease, if you have a genetic linkage to it, they'll say do things with your opposite side to keep your cognitive function active. It's actually a good thing for brain health. All right, let me go here real quick. And so, sorry, am I going the wrong way? Sorry, I'm going the wrong way. Okay, here we go. And so in terms of skill development constraints, I'm just going to go over the first ones quick. You have observational learning. That's just looking at video, right? You can look at video and have it be really productive, or you can have it not be productive. So video could be a positive and negative constraint. Perceptual streams, that's just the sensory information that you get in. So timing, we don't learn timing by seeing, we learn timing by hearing. So if someone's trying to teach you something timing and they're giving you visuals, that would be a negative constraint in that perspective. Verbal instructions, Leo does a really good job of using this, and the coaches here is focus of attention. So you might notice, I don't know if you've noticed this or not, but instead of them saying, get your right elbow in, they'll give you some instruction that doesn't pertain to your body movements at all. And you may be thinking, why don't they just tell me to get my right elbow in? And it's because they know in the research that that's not the better approach to take for performance and learning. And then we have coaching strategies and techniques, and then we have technology. Technology is fantastic. We have a ton of it in golf, but it could be used the wrong way and it become a negative constraint. And then we have practice. This is what we're here for, right? So how do we do it? I titled this section, Cold Showers, Bricks, and Cake, right? And so you'll understand what that is in a little bit. So practice plans for golf. Okay, so look at these sayings here, right? Has everybody heard of those? Right? Practice makes perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. Repetition. Do it until you get it right. You play how you practice. And then muscle memory. Okay, those are all false. But we reinforce these all the time. But they're all false, right? For my undergraduates, I call them, these are like BS filters. Intro-level muscle memory, that's a BS filter, right? And what I mean by BS is you can tell someone is giving you BS if they're talking about these things. It's okay now, but after this, now you know, right? You have your BS filter, okay? And so just some things, but these are things that get reinforced to us on a daily basis, right? You watch sports on TV, they'll say these sorts of things. So motor learning in golf today, there's this thing called random and block practice. I encourage you to go on YouTube afterwards and just put in random and block practice, right? And then see what they're saying about it. Attentional focus, what we talked about. There's different kinds of feedback we can give, deliberate back as we talked about constraints. Okay, so how I like to look at all these things is we could say that we do one or the other, right? And do one or the other really well. But I look at those as like they're just bricks. We can have bricks, right? But because I have a pile of bricks, because I know these different things, doesn't mean that I have a nice, beautiful structure there. Okay, it's just like your strength trainers here. They can give you an exercise, but it's done in a specific way, right? So the bricks are put in a specific manner, so you get a specific change out of it, right? And what I want to talk to you about is how do we get a variety of bricks, right, and have a really seamless, beneficial practice session. Okay, that's what we'll talk about. And so this is our scenario. Here, you get a lesson for an hour, then you're done with your lesson, then what? What do you do? Right? What do most of you likely do? Let's say you need to get more lateral shift in your swing. Then you go to the range and what do? You get a bucket of balls. If you're super committed, get a large bucket of balls and you work on your lateral shift over and over again, right? It's a really common way to practice. Okay? And so when you do those sorts of things, it's similar to what's called like this block style of practice, right? So let's give us a different scenario. Let's say you want to work on your 100-yard wedge shots, your 150-yard iron shots, and some longer iron shots at 200 yards. Those three distances, right? Most people will say, all right, I'm going to get the bucket. I'm going to hit a third of the bucket at 100 yards, the next third of the bucket at 150 yards, and the remainder of the bucket at 200 yards. Okay, did everybody see what I did there? I basically divided my bucket up evenly. I said 100, 150, 200. That's what's called a block style of practice. Okay, a random style of practice is completely the opposite. You never go to the same distance twice. It's always changing. And even on top of that, right, if you have someone that's there with you, they're just calling out the yardages. You don't know what's coming next. Has anybody ever practiced like that before? Okay. And has anybody ever practiced like the block style before? Everybody does, right? Okay. I'm glad that we had people that raised their hands random, right? Because this is what we have here. This is like block and random practice. If I tell you to do block and random practice, it'd be like me telling you, okay, what we're going to do to clean ourselves is we're going to take an ice cold shower. And then another way that you can clean yourself, which is going to be more effective, is you take a scalding hot shower. Anybody do either of those? Why? It's very uncomfortable and they're extremes, right? So in the realm of practice, random and block practice are the extremes. We don't operate on extremes in pretty much anything that we do. There's all this area in between, right? So that's why I want you to go on to YouTube after this and look up random and block practice, and you'll have people that say, never do block practice, always do random practice, right? I have PGA Tour players that do block style practice. I have PGA Tour players that do random style practice. But the bulk of what they do, they don't do either of those. Most of their stuff is in between, right? So just be aware of that, like when you hear certain things. So what are you supposed to do then? How are you supposed to practice, okay? So when I do practice plans, I say it's the difference between baking and cooking, right? What's the difference between baking and cooking? Baking tastes better. Unless there's no sugar in it. What's the difference? Do you know what the difference between baking and cooking is? Which one is? Baking is like chemistry, right? If you get the wrong amount at the wrong time, it doesn't turn out. But cooking, you just throw that stuff in, whatever. So like that's why I have the picture of gumbo up there. You just throw it in, whatever it comes out, it's going to boil for like whatever. It's going to stew for like 3 hours. Longer it stews, the better. It's different from baking. I look at creating practice plans like baking, right? I need to be able to modify, adjust, create complexity and difficulty based on your needs. And your needs don't stay the same over a period of time because you're going to get better and better. And so where do we start? How do I start practice plans? One from coaches, okay? One from data, whether it be from kinematics or ground reaction forces, like the swing cat that you have in there. And the other one is from strokes gain data. Has anybody heard of strokes gain stats or data before? If you haven't, it's fantastic for golf. Because if you want to know where your true weaknesses are, this type of data will tell you, right? They'll say, well, you're weak in 8-foot putts. You're weak off the tee. You're weak hitting to the green. It will tell you exactly where you're weak at or where you're losing strokes to the field.
Is there like apps?
Yeah, there's several of them. Yeah, there's several of them. And they're really good if you're really committed to taking a data-based approach. So this is where I get my stuff. Remember, I'm not a swing coach, right? I don't come up with this stuff. I just use the data to help generate this stuff. I use coaches to help tell me what it is. Okay? So this is basically, it may seem scary for a little bit, but this is basically a framework for practice. It's not for you to memorize, but this is just telling you how I design practice for my players. This is what I do. I take this thing called CI, contextual interference, right? All it is this. Are you doing things 100, 100, 100, 100? 150, 150, 150, 200, 200, 200. Remember that scenario? That's here, right? And what was the other scenario? Everybody remember what it was called? Random. That's over here, right? And look at all this space that we have in between, right? So, and then we have here. So now, how many yardages did I give you in our scenario to practice? I give you 3. Could I have given you more? Why didn't I give you more? Just because it was easy for me to explain 3, right? But I can have more. That's what this is. If I give you 3 distances, we're here. If I give you 1, we're here. If I give you 25, we're up there, right? So as a motor learning, or for me to be able to develop your skill, these are things that I have to manage. How many distances should you be practicing, and in what order, and how much repetition should you be practicing them in, right? We're not talking about, it's not about hours anymore, right? The East Coast players, I work with a lot of East Coast juniors, and this is what I tell the parents. It's super cold right there, right? They got the polar, Arctic vortex, something like that. And so all the juniors here, or players here, are at advantage because we're out in the sun and we're playing and practicing, and they're probably playing hockey. Maybe they're hitting indoors. But this is what I say. If you're really efficient with your practice, like doing these types of stuff, it'll make over 4 reps, right? So we can spend less time practicing, and if it's more efficient, then it's going to be better than the person that's just beating balls for hours and hours and hours, right? And we don't have that amount of time. And so this is basically what it breaks down to. In general, beginners operate here, intermediate players operate here, and experts operate over there, right? So if you're working on if you're a 2 index and you are 15 index, your practice plans are going to be entirely different, even though you're working on the same yardage, right? They're going to be entirely different. And so here are some examples, right? This is a tour player's short game example here. So here I have distances, 15 yards, and we're working on trajectory. So low means, or L is low, H is high, M is medium, right? And so they're doing 15 yards, 5 minutes, and they just go in that order. Low, high, medium, low, high, medium, low, high, medium for 15 minutes. And they go on to the next distance, and then they go on to the next distance, okay? And then there's tempo, right? So tempo of the swing. So we have fast, slow, and medium. And then we have a challenge drill where I combine the tempo and the trajectory together. The reason why I have tempo here is because this particular player said in pressure conditions, they tend to get a little bit faster with their tempo. And so how I look at it is I don't want to avoid the fast. So I'm not going to do things to say, oh, let's make sure we keep it the same, because that's not realistic. What I do is I say, okay, let's show you if your tempo is faster, how do you deal with it? And you've practiced it before, right? So that would be an example of a short game, yeah.
Yeah, a question, is that with the same club or you change club?
So yeah, so this one's with the same club. So it'd be a different club than I'd have it on there, right? Here's an example of this. This would have putting, right? And so this is an example of a putting plan, right? So Scott. So there's Scott works with a coach by the name of E.J. Pfister, who coaches some tour players, web.com, PGA. And he came to one of my talks, and he saw this, and he took a picture of it. And I think it was like 2 years ago. And I saw him in Orlando at the PGA show, and he's like, hey, Will, I'm still doing that putting thing. I was like, you are? Because it should be changing, right? Your practice shouldn't be the same for long periods of time. It should be changing. I was like, EJ, we got to talk. And he's like, yeah, we do. And so so here you have 4 feet. And in my putting drills, I actually have drills where I want you to miss them. No, I want you to miss the putt, but I want you to miss it in a certain way, right? So we have something called the miss drill, which is there. We have distance drills there, and then I'll have like a warm-up there. So that'd be an example of a putting plan. And then this is a full swing plan here. And so let me see, the middle here, 18 minutes. That's how long I want them to do the dual quarter swing practice. So this is how soon they're setting the club, whether it be late, ideal, early, right? That type of thing. And I'm getting all this stuff, like when to set the club, distances. Distances coming from strokes gained. When to set the club, that's coming from their coach or their instructor, right? I'm just putting the recipe together. Ingredients are coming elsewhere. But it's chemistry in terms of how I do it. And then I have like a your choice. You choose anything you want after that. Okay, so those are some examples of how it looks. It's really detailed in nature. And this is the thing. This is something that I learned early on. what do players say about the cognitive challenge? So how they're thinking when they're practicing. Okay. So this is a report that I got early on. I built out a plan. The guy was practicing for 8 hours a day. And he says, I can't do this. I can't do the drills for 20 minutes straight. I was like, are you tired? And he goes, no, I get headaches, like when I'm doing it. He says, why? I go, why is this head hurting? Because this type of practice requires you, in plain speak, to think a lot about what you're doing or how you're doing it, right? Rather than just being on automatic mode. I'm hitting 100 yards, 100 yards, 100 yards, 100 yards, 100 yards, right? It causes you to think about and strategize about how you're moving from 100 yards to 150 yards. So what I've had to do is I have to institute breaks, right? So now I go, okay, do this for 5 minutes and take a 5-minute break. And you can do anything you want. You can have a protein bar, you can look at your phone and do whatever you want. But to me, that's a really good sign, because how many of you, when you're hitting balls or practicing, had to take a break because you were concentrating and focusing on your golf so much from a movement standpoint? But most of you were probably, I stopped because I was tired. My hands were raw, right? Or my hands were tired, or my arms were tired, or my back's getting sore, or something like that, right? So this is a good sign, right? That there's a lot of cognitive challenge. Like you're thinking about and strategizing and trying to piece together things up here, right? So that was something that I learned early on. Okay, so basically what I need to do in a nutshell, I need to identify and manage variables of interest. I get those from the coaches, analyze it based on expertise level, identify difficulty level, right? Because I can create a practice program that will just smash you and you won't like it, right? And if you get smashed, are you going to want to practice? No. If it's too easy, are you going to want to practice? No. But if I hold that carrot out, are you going to want to practice? Yeah, you are. So I need to be able to do that. And this is the important thing. If you've been doing a drill, I tell coaches this all the time, if you've been doing a drill for years and years and years, that's like saying, I've been doing 10 push-ups, one set of 10 push-ups for years and years and years, because I'm trying to get stronger, right? Doesn't make sense, right? So just like for strength, you need to periodize your skill. So your practice plans have to change over the course of time. You'll get better. That means your practice will get easier. So then your practice has to change so it's not as easy for you, right? Those sorts of things. I got to match the level of challenge. Mac?
So it'd be kind of a good time to talk about like boredom in practice.
Oh, for sure, yeah. So we often get, there's a gentleman by the name of Csikszentmihalyi. So if everybody's heard about being in the zone before, right? That's the common term for it. But the academic or research term is called flow theory, right? So flow theory is based on if we have a good match, whether things aren't too boring for us or not too challenging for us, we'll do that thing for a long time, right? So people who design video games for your kids and maybe for yourself, they do a really good job of doing that. That's why your kids or you will spend hours and hours playing that video game, because it's the right amount of challenge for them, right? We can leverage those same things from a skill perspective, so you don't get bored and go, oh, this is too easy. I made all my 2-foot putts. Why do I need this? Or this is too difficult. You want me to make a 35-foot left to right or double breaker, right? I can't make any of them. I'm out of here, kind of thing. So that's a really good, yeah. So things like bored. So you can be bored if it's too difficult, or you could be bored because it's too easy, right?
And then from a motivational standpoint, like in acquiring skills, what about like when you're talking about professional athletes, Olympians, collegiate players,
Yeah.
Versus the average, amateur golfer or avid player?
Yeah.
And how does motivation kind of tie in with your research?
I'll speak to it just as it relates to skill learning. I'm not a sports psychologist.
That goes outside your realm.
Yeah. And so I'll be the first one to tell you, like, if it's biomechanics, I'm going to go see that dude back there, because he's like, literally, he's like one of the best golf biomechanists in the world. If it's a sports psych thing, I'll be like, and you guys have a sports psych person here. Like, you can talk about that stuff. But things like motivation, tour players are motivated by greatness and getting a big check. High school players may be motivated by by college. So people are motivated, right? I play in a club. Most of you probably play in a club. You're motivated by whether it be club championship or just winning that $5 for the 18 holes.
So how
like
do you
whatever it would be.
distinguish between like which pathway to take with a player? If they are, can you tell if they're bored or if they're not acquiring the skill as well because of motivation?
Oh, yeah. Oh, excellent question. So this is how I did. There's two ways in which I modify. So the one way is I give you a rating system, right? So I don't necessarily do it by psychological measure. Like I don't say, are you bored or not? I do it by a rating. And so I go 1 to 5. I have two ways of changing your practice, by the data or by this rating system. 1 to 5. 5, you dominate the drill. You couldn't have done it any better. You rate yourself a 5. 1, you got smashed by the drill. You didn't do anything right. And a 3 is in the middle, right? You're like average. And so I ask people to rate each drill that they do. And so I don't change until I get 3 to 5 ratings. So if you give me a 5 on the first 3, I'm changing it, right? If you give me a 1 on the first 3, I'm changing it. If you give me a 3, maybe you have a 4, I'm probably going to keep it the same, right? So I do it based on that. Yeah. Okay, good question. So I call it periodization of skill. It shouldn't be stagnant. And then here's the framework here. You've seen that. And I say, at this point in time, if you're here, you don't need to do this stuff yourself. You can try to do it yourself, but you don't need to do it yourself. There are resources to be able to do that type of thing. And this should look familiar to you. I always say build your team. Like Max said, what about the motivational stuff? Sports psych, I go see a sports psych person. If you don't know one or don't have one, then I can refer you to one. If it's mechanics, go see a biomechanist. If it's strength thing, go see a strength coach. If it's practice, then come see me. Right? So I always say build your team. There's you. There's the coach, which you have here. There's biomechanics, which you have here, right? Your coaches are doing. There's motor learning, right? Your foundation for what you're doing here. There's a component of that. And then you guys have physio and sport med, and you guys also have club fitting, right? So in my opinion, from what I see around the country, what you guys are doing here is super cool. And I think what Leo has asked me to do, what Mac has asked me to do, come in is talk to you about the motor learning stuff so we can round things out a little bit more and then be able to develop some nice practice habits and practice approaches so you can get the total benefit for everything. Okay, if you want to contact me, you can feel free to drop me an email. I'm more than happy to help you out. Hope that didn't go too long.
So, when we talk about learning, I'd like you to talk a little bit more about like the definition of learning.
Oh, okay, yeah. Okay.
You know,
Yeah.
performance change versus true learning.
Oh, that's it.
And how long that process actually takes.
Leo makes an excellent point. Has everybody seen before and after pictures? Like you go to Instagram, you go to Twitter, Facebook, whatever, and there's a before and after picture, like a coach says, all right, this is the before, and then they had a lesson, and this is the after. And it's like much better, right? So Leo's question is that learning? Can you learn in an hour? We're like, and you're kind of right when you're like, You can change performance in an hour, but you can't learn in an hour, right? At least not this golf stuff in an hour. It takes a period of time, right? So how do I assess learning? Okay, how do I assess learning? So I assess learning through tournament play, through tests, right? Practice, a long period or a period of no practice, consistency over time. But learning is not a quick fix thing. We call that a performance change. When I say motor control and motor learning, they're two different things. Motor control is what can we fix right away, right? Learning is what are some things that are stable movement patterns over time, right? So I would say that you learned a movement pattern of the swing really well is if you can do it on different lies, right? Or if you can do it in different ground conditions, right? Or you can do it with different shaping balls different ways, right? Being adaptable with what you learned, that's learning. But learning doesn't occur over short periods of time. We call those performance changes. Learning occurs over a period of time, right? Just like what you're doing here from a physiological standpoint, right? They give you an exercise, a mobility or stretching exercise. Do you have a little bit more range of motion right away? Yeah, a little bit, right? But when 3 hours or the next day, right? Are you like, oh, right, got it. Mobility, range of motion, all good. No, right? It takes many sessions, right? And then you get better over time. Same thing with learning. It takes many sessions over a period of time. No quick changes with learning.
So if you're in here and you're working on your 7-iron and you're ripping it, right?
Mm.
And you think you got it.
Yeah.
And then you go on to the course and it doesn't feel the same. So you're saying learning is measured by doing it well in a different environment, maybe with a different club.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on that?
So my students will ask me in class, I have different learning assessments, and I'll just cut to the chase and give you the best one. They'll say, which one do you like, Dr. Wu? And I go, it's called the transfer test, right? And it's exactly what Leo says. I say, okay, let's say you go into one of the swing bays and you're working on your 7-iron to 150 yards, right? And then what's the test for me of whether you learned or not? You go out and play the next day, and I go, shoot your 7-iron to 150 yards? And you go, no, I had 4 opportunities to hit my 7-iron. I chunked the first one, I thinned the next one. The other one I kind of got on the face and only went 130 yards. And then the next one, the last one, did go 150 yards. And then what would be the conclusion? Did that session in the bay, did you learn something from it based on that assessment? Right? It wouldn't be. But if you did that over and over, many times in the bay or many times on the range, right, would your ability to repeat it on the course be better? Absolutely, right? So it's a process, and then what you do in the bay or what you do in the range is exactly what we talked about here. And we can design in ways that facilitate better learning or faster learning, or more efficient learning, or you can choose a way that probably is less efficient on your time. It's one of the things is, man, I hit the ball like awesome on the range for the whole week, and then I'm coming to the course and I don't hit it that well. It's probably because your practice wasn't designed very efficiently for you. Okay, yeah.
Well, let's say you're having a bad day, and you're doing a drill that you can normally do pretty good, but today you're doing it horrible.
Yeah.
Is that practice? Should you keep practicing, or is it counterproductive, or
Yeah. So it happens.
matter from motor learning whether you're successful that day or not? Even though.
Yeah, so for me, I'd look at how you're doing the drill, right? So oftentimes what I could see is someone will say, I practice this a ton and I can't transfer it over to the course. And I do these drills. And then a lot of times people say it's psychological because you're doing it over and over again. It's not psychological. It's a byproduct of how you're practicing. It's that repetition. Repetition of the same thing over and over again is not necessarily a good thing. Right? So I just switched the drill up a little bit. Right? When I hear of drills, to me drills is like I'm lifting weights. Like, what are you doing lifting weights? Like, what exactly are you doing? So when I hear drills, it's like, what are you doing for the drill? What most people are doing is they're doing the same thing over and over again. Or it's a simplified version, right, of what they're supposed to do, and they're expecting the simplified version to carry over to the complex version on the course. Okay? Does that make sense?
So, I mean, is it ever counterproductive to practice?
Yes. When you're tired, right, it could be counterproductive because then you're not able to produce the movements. I would always say bare minimum, repetitions is better than no repetitions. But that's like saying eating is better than not eating, right? It's like at the most basic level. It's the ways in which we want to talk about ways in which you want to eat, right? But if you're starting to get tired, and that's what you're doing here, you're building your motor, you need a motor to be able to practice, right? So if you're starting to get tired, it's probably the time to just stop practicing because it's probably not doing you too much good. Maybe go putt because that's not going to be as difficult from a physiological standpoint. Yeah.
And like part of your team, what part of your team would be considered like nutritionists to fuel yourself properly?
Yeah, that's in there too. So I usually say you can have a separate nutritionist, or a lot of strength coaches are doing nutrition also, or they're combining the two. At my center, we have a separate nutritionist, but that's just because we're a university and we can. But I would, like, you can ask your strength coaches, and your strength coaches usually have really good knowledge for nutrition and how to feel yourself during practice and feel yourself during play. Yeah, good question. Yeah.
In the past, working with somebody, have you recommended that they switch from left to right when they just can't get it behind that door back there?
No, I haven't. I've only seen it with Charles Barkley, and it didn't work. No, but I've never recommended that. There could be utility for it from golf's super asymmetric sport. So one of the reasons why I have him hit left-handed is so just naturally within activities he can balance some imbalance that is occurring. But I've never done that.
Because I'm righty, I'm right-handed.
Yeah.
But I play left-handed.
Mm.
Same thing with baseball.
Yeah.
The only two I can play left.
Yeah.
And at one point, my score keeps going in the wrong direction. So I said, hey, I better switch.
Yeah.
And I actually can play pretty good right-handed. So.
Well, that's a good point that you make. Score is something that's entirely different. You can swing better in here, but does that make your score better? If you make bad decisions on the golf course, it could just be a decision that saves you strokes. So the gentleman by the name of Scott Fawcett, he has this, he does golf strategy, so where you should be hitting on the green based on your dispersion pattern. Those types of things will save you strokes in a round, right? And you didn't even have to work on your swing. It's just choices that you make on the course. So I wouldn't go by score. Right, left-handed, I would never make that decision. I'd leave you and your coach to make that decision. But score is different from how you're contacting the ball. Yeah. That's something else that you all should look into if you'd like to, is how you're strategizing. And that will save you strokes, whether or not you just chip it out to the fairway or whether or not you're trying to make a hero shot. Right?
One more question, Greg. What about like situational practice if you're on the range and whether it's the first tee shot?
Oh, I love that question. Yeah.
Visualizing or whatnot.
Yeah. So I just got a new web player that I'm designing for, and one of the things that I have in my questionnaire is when you practice, how much is range practice and how much is course practice? I never touch course practice. Right? So if he says I'm 4 hours on the course and 3 hours on the range, the first thing that I attack is those 3 hours. I never say go to the range more. I always say, okay, within those 3 hours, let's just make it better. In my opinion, like if you want to know how I do it, is when I practice with my son, I make the course more like the range rather than the range more like the course. So if I want to have him hit knock down 6 irons, in the middle of playing, we'll go underneath a tree and I'll go, here's 5 balls, go hit a couple knockdown 6s, and then we'll move on like that. And so to me, the situational stuff is good, but you can't go overboard because the situational stuff, you only get one opportunity to do it. Maybe you need 3, maybe you need 5, right? But I would never say don't play. Playing is really useful. It's just what are you doing within those times when you're in a bay or when you're on the driving range? Make that more efficient.
Yeah, it's like Sevi's story is a good example around El Cabrera.
Yeah.
It's not golf courses, but it's just a bunch of different sort of environments that simulate what a golf course would be, and then when they're in positions that they need to get out of, it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, because when you think about that example, I mean, in those guys, they're known for their creativity, right, with what they did. Those examples are different task characteristics, right, different environments. They're kind of the same as individually, but you're changing up those situations. So course play. I try to make, a coach, my son's coach, his name's John Dunnigan. He'll say, make the course more range-like. And that would be, and I agree with that. That would be the better way to go. But we all have our constraints to the courses that we're on, right? If we're playing on a public course, you can't stop and hit 5 balls underneath a tree or something like that. Maybe you can at the end of the day or something like that, or no one's on the course. But those are constraints, right? Those are environmental constraints. Okay.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.